Good evening to our participants from the Middle East, and good afternoon to our viewers in the West. My name is Mayce Mostafa, president of the MIT Arab Alumni Association, a volunteer-run association that was established to connect MIT and the Arab world and create a space for alumni to collaborate. Allow me to welcome you to our inaugural program of a series of webinars featuring alumni and experts from various fields. Today, we are joined by two exceptional Arab women in the STEM industry. Through this webinar, they will share their personal stories, their current work, and how they view the world during and post the pandemic in their respective fields. The webinar will last for about an hour. I will begin by introducing our speakers, followed by some questions for them to answer. Finally, we will close with a question and answer session. To participate in the Q&A session, please type your questions in the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. There will be no voice participation. Without delaying it further, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Dr. Rana Al-Kalyoubi, who is a pioneer in emotional artificial intelligence, co-founder and CEO of Affectiva, and author of the newly released book, Girl Decoded. A passionate advocate for humanizing technology, ethics in AI, and diversity. Rana has been recognized on Fortune's 40 Under 40 list and as one of Forbes' top 50 women in tech. Rana is a World Economic Forum Young Global Leader and a Young Presidents Organization member, and co-hosted a PBS Nova series on AI. She holds a PhD from Cambridge and a postdoctorate from MIT. Reem Khouri. Reem is the co-founder and CEO of Wise, an impact and analytics software solution that enables organizations to aggregate their data in real time, analyze it, align with international standards, and benchmarks for evidence-based decision-making. Wise was selected in 2019 by the World Economic Forum as one of the 100 startups contributing to the fourth industrial revolution. She was recognized as one of the world's 100 most influential Arabs under 40 by Arabian Business Magazine in 2015 and 2016, and in 2018 as a young global leader for the World Economic Forum. She is also the founding partner of Kamin, an impact design company that has worked in the Middle East, Asia, and Africa with governments, companies, and NGOs to design models for exponential economic and social returns. We'll first speak to Dr. Rana. Dr. Rana, it's long been known that artificial intelligence and machine learning will change the world and professions as we know them. Many professions dealing with repetitive tasks such as observe, analyze, and conclude are being done more efficiently with AI. However, the trick is developing those skills that are harder to replicate, such as human interaction, social understanding, and motivation. You're one of the pioneers of emotional AI. Please tell us more about Affectiva, your challenges in making AI more human, and the role of the pandemic played with your research.
Thank you, Maysa, and thank you for having me. And Reem, I'm so excited to have this interaction as well. I didn't realize we were both WEF Young Global Leaders, so I'm sure we have a lot of experiences in common. And hi, everybody, from wherever you're joining from. Very excited to be here today. So yeah, I've been on this mission to humanize technology over the last 20 years. I studied computer science as an undergraduate and then did my PhD at Cambridge University, really building the first version of an emotionally intelligent machine. And then I joined MIT as a postdoc at the MIT Media Lab. And there we started to explore the applications of artificial emotional intelligence and how can we use emotion AI to augment people's abilities, right? As you were saying, like a lot of the repetitive tasks are being really automated by AI, but also AI is becoming mainstream and it's taking on roles that were traditionally done by humans, like driving your car or helping with your healthcare or hiring your next coworker, right? So I feel strongly that we need this new social contract between humans and machines. And I'm on this mission to essentially make it a human-centric contract. And that the one that is based on trust, one that's based on empathy. And I strongly believe that that's going to revolutionize not just human machine interfaces, but also how we connect and communicate with one another in a virtual world. And of course, the pandemic has really underscored, the importance of technology and how we connect and communicate, especially in the last year with the pandemic, right? So one example I like to give is we've all been on these Zoom conversations or live video conferencing conversations where you don't see your audience. So imagine if you had emotion AI technology that is able to track the level of engagement and level of attention of your audience members, and it's able to aggregate that anonymously in a way, you know, a real-time curve that shows the level of interest or level of, you know, if I say something funny, do people laugh? I think that would create more of a sense of a shared experience, because right now, you know, it's sometimes really hard to do these events virtually when you have no idea how your audience is reacting. So there's a lot of application of this technology in telehealth, online learning. We do a lot of work in the automotive space. Mental health is another area of interest. So yeah, a lot of applications across industry that has been accelerated because of the pandemic.
And do you want to tell us more about Girl Decoded, a little brief for our audience?
Sure. So Girl Decoded is my memoir. It was published, the book came out last year in hardcover, and the publisher is Penguin Random House. And the paperback launch was just a week ago. So I'm very excited that the book is out. It's a memoir, and it follows my story growing up in the Middle East. I'm originally from Egypt, born in Cairo, grew up around the Gulf. So I lived in Kuwait until the first Gulf War, and then my parents moved to Abu Dhabi. And it follows my journey from the Middle East to England to the United States, but also my transition from an academic to an entrepreneur and CEO in a very male-dominated society. So I talk about that, but intertwined in it is the journey of the technology. Like, how do you build emotion AI, and what are some of the use cases, and what are the ethical and moral implications of that technology and our role as consumers? So it's kind of this intertwined story of the technology, but also my personal story. And I hope people who read it, you know, I hope it brings people inspiration and helps people be confident to forge their own path. It wasn't easy for me, but yeah, I kind of persevered. Yeah, so I hope it inspires people who decide to read it.
It's great, first of all, because you're a woman, and second of all, coming from Middle Eastern background. I'm sure a lot of our viewers already signed up for the book, so they're very excited to read it. Similarly, Reem, you're using AI to analyze a large amount of data, but it takes the human touch to understand a company's political situation and know how to implement solutions efficiently with the current leadership. Please tell us more about Wise, your journey, and how you reacted to the pandemic.
Thank you, Mayce, and lovely to be with you, Rana, and definitely want to catch up after this. And thank you for having us. So my career, so I don't come from technology. I remember when I don't come from a technology background. And when you first approached me, I said, I don't think I'm the right person because I'm not a techie. I did not study computer science. I don't code. But I think that's also part of the interesting thing, right? That you can actually run a company that is technology based without necessarily having being the techie yourself. Having said that, it was the most vertical learning curve of my career over the past 2 years, where you have to learn how and understand how it works, but you don't necessarily have to be able to do it yourself. So I would say, just to touch on what Rana mentioned, that if people want to start their own business and their own entrepreneurial endeavor, and they need technology, not to think that just because I don't have that background, I don't know how to do it, that they shouldn't try to do it. They should find the co-founders that would help them do so. So that's just a side note. My journey has been so I'm originally Palestinian. I've always been extremely curious to understand, how did we get, not just as Palestinians, but in the Arab world, how did we get to where we are today, right? So why does the world look like this? And why does our part of the world looks like this? And a big part of that question was, just trying to understand how governments work, how NGOs work, how the private sector works. And I started my career with the private sector because I believe that if we wanted to see change, the private sector, with the capital and with the resources and with the networks and the infrastructure that they have, could actually contribute to the development of our countries much more than if trying to change a policy from a government point of view, especially in the Arab world, but I think it's everywhere these days. And also from the NGO perspective, where you're more driven by what the donors want versus what you're actually trying to create as change. And so I joined an amazing company and an amazing founder called Fadi Ghandour, and the company is called Aramex. And I actually learned everything I needed to learn while I was working there. There was no, I joined, there was no job position. We created one. I was a jack of all trades. I worked on everything. And so projects that included marketing and business and technology, et cetera. And so that's how I ended up learning. And then I ended up being also on the Sustainability Council of Aramex. And Aramex was the first company to ever issue a sustainability report and an integrated report. And I found that fascinating to actually look at how organizations look at their impact and measure their impact. Eventually, I left and I started Kamen, which is an impact design company. And we ended up working with governments, with large banks, with social enterprises and foundations on helping them articulate the change that they want to create and how to measure it. But whoever we ended up working with actually had the same gap. They did not have data. And so if you want to design something that would create change without having access to the data that tells you if that change is happening or not, that tells you what's actually are the needs in the community, that tells you, how are the partnerships that you're creating actually exponentially multiplying that impact? What is it that you do that's creating that change? The data was not there, and everyone had the same problem. And it was fascinating to see that, private equity funds would spend millions of dollars on software and AI solutions for financial data. But when it came to reporting on their impact, right, it was an Excel sheet. It was a checklist of an Excel sheet. And that was, to me, mind-boggling. And that's when I actually started with my co-founders, Wise. We said we wanted to create a solution. We didn't want to be a reporting tool, right? I don't think that the idea is not reporting to your stakeholders like a checklist of what you're doing. The idea is, let's help you figure out what you need to measure, what the data that you need to capture is, and what are the correlations that exist, right? So what is the combination of characteristics and activities that you do that are actually creating the biggest change for your stakeholders or for the community that's you're operating in? A big part of it is accountability, right? It's also about saying, I want to understand, I want to be better. And so it's been also an uphill battle because there's it's a new field. And there's a lot of awareness building of, saying it's not about you getting the stamp that you have a GRI report or an ESG report, as much as you truly understanding what's happening around you and capturing that data. When it comes to the pandemic, I think one of the biggest reasons, I would start with a positive, right? So the positive, although it's difficult to think about anything positive coming out of COVID, was that it forced a lot of organizations to have a digital infrastructure when they didn't have one, or they weren't necessarily convinced it was a priority. But what was very interesting is we came up with a solution very early on in the pandemic. We did something with the UNDP where we captured what are the biggest needs for small and medium enterprises during the pandemic. Very few of them talked about, everyone needed to preserve cash and think about cash flow, but a lot of them felt that the most important thing they need to focus on is innovation so that they can pivot their models and survive the pandemic. Yeah, so we actually created a survey and captured for organizations and captured how the mental health and the well-being of the employees of these companies. Because if you need to innovate, what's going to make you resilient is your ability to adapt and innovate. For you to be able to adapt and innovate, you have to have a team that is willing to, that is going to be putting all of this effort. yet the results were outstanding, right? Like it was like 80% were worried about their financial security, more than, I think it was in the 70% that felt that they are unable, that they are under a lot of stress and that they have a very high degree of anxiety. A lot of them, and nothing that, some of them were worried about their own personal financials, or about keeping their jobs. And so when you look at these numbers, there's no way that employees that feel that way will be able to innovate, right? And so that would spark also a conversation of, I know I cannot work on anxiety with, all of the team members, but one thing that I could do is actually acknowledge it, discuss it, find resources that will help you talk about it. And so I think this is also part of what Rana's talking about. It's not about data for reporting or for, checklists. It's how can you really change the way people think and companies operate and organizations operate based on data that does not make human beings data points, right? But that gives you insights on what these human beings need. Sorry, it took so long.
No, بالعكس. Thank you, Reem. So, Rena, there has been a rising concern about regulation in the artificial intelligence field, especially in emotional intelligence. With the pandemic, there's been a fear of a big brother effect, and a lot of them are fearing it's becoming more real. So, what measures are you taking to respond to these concerns?
Yeah, and I want to kind of build on something that Reem said, right? It's all about humanizing this data, humanizing how we approach, how we think about technology. I'm a big advocate for thoughtful regulation, actually, and I'm part of the World Economic Forum. I used to serve on the Global Council for Robotics and AI for a number of years, and it was a multi-stakeholder, very global council where we were thinking through, okay, what are the guidelines and what are the best practices that we need to put out there for governments, for organizations, startups, in terms of how they build and deploy AI, right, in a very ethical way. I'm also part of an organization called the Partnership on AI. It's mostly US centric, but not only US partners. It was started by the tech giants. So IBM, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Apple, as well as organizations like Amnesty International and ACLU, so civil liberty organizations, and startups like Affectiva. And I'm on the fair, accountable, transparent, and equitable committee, the FATE committee. And we just finished a whole project where we looked at artificial emotional intelligence and we tried to identify all of the use cases that we could think of and some of the unintended consequences, right? Like, where could this go wrong? And we started to kind of log all of the different ways this can go wrong. And then we started to develop guidelines and kind of preemptively think about, okay, how can we prevent this from happening? And part of it is regulation and legislation. But also, honestly, part of it is we as innovators and AI thought leaders doing the right thing. And so I think of myself as a steward for this tech category because I'm one of the early innovators of this space. I'm a thought leader and an innovator. And I think it's really incumbent on me to guide the industry, me and others, right? To guide the industry to do the right thing. And so as a company, we have turned down often millions of dollars of funding, potential funding and revenue, where we felt it was not the right use case for the technology, like in surveillance and security and lie detection. I don't think that's the right application for this technology. And we have chosen to not engage as a business. So we're probably making less money than we could, but I think it's the right thing to do for society. And I believe leaders, CEOs of our organizations, we need to have this broader view of who our stakeholders are. It's not just your investors or your employees or your customers. It's really society at large. And I think we're starting to see a pattern of leaders who have this broader view of who their stakeholders are.
Thank you, Rana. Now, Tareem, faced with all this data, what measures does WISE take to ensure that their safety and the client's security and privacy?
Yeah, I think it should definitely start with the values, right? Like Rana mentioned, I think the values of the organization. We did a similar exercise from day one, right? When we started operating, we said these are industries we don't want to work with, or these are things we did not want to approach or touch on. And it's just a very clear red line for us. The second part, also from day one, is where is going to be our data hosted, because we're working with foundations and government initiatives, with also corporations, but with foundations specifically, we kept worrying, especially with everything that happened and that's happening around the world. But in my mind, it was very fresh, the Arab Spring and everything that happened. What if intelligence officers come and say, I want the data of this foundation that works on democracy? And, so I needed to make sure that where we're hosted, who has access to the data is actually also captured and taken care of, so that it's never an issue for us or for the clients or for everyone else. Second part is, of course, there's technical measures you take for security and privacy. But I think one of the most interesting things to look at is when you want to keep the data private from your clients, right? Because there's one thing when your company is self-reporting on its impact versus you're asking the stakeholders to report on their impact. And case in point would be, they're trying to track the impact of their on their employees, right? So and or engagement or satisfaction or mental health, right? And that's very private information, and you're sending the survey directly to the employees, but your client is the CEO or is the organization that says this data is mine. And so how do you protect that data? And that goes actually into it's not just the technology, it goes into the design of how do you design the surveys in a way where you don't even if you make them anonymous, right? But where you create categorization so that they cannot make the link between this, like there's a department that has one person, so I'll know, or that has two people, one female, one male, I'll know who answered what. And so I think there's a lot of thinking that should go through not just the technical solution, but the design of the data sets, the design. I mean, we have so many different measures. In the data set, you can add a confidential field that no one sees, including your client. You can, you have the encryption, and you have multiple layers. But I think the most important one is that one that goes into the design. So being extremely conscious of how this could go wrong and how someone can be prosecuted or persecuted because of that data, and design it in a way where you have classifications, categorizations. You can never pinpoint an actual individual from that data. I think that's the most important thing. And I think it always starts with values and self-awareness, right? So unless you have those values, you're not going to be consciously and intentionally designing your product and your data set in that way. And so I think it always have to come out to first values and consciousness and intentionality.
Can I build on that? Because it's so fascinating, because your data set looks very different than our data set, but it's the same core principles. So our data is mostly videos of people watching content or driving their cars around. And we have over 10.5 million facial videos from 90 countries around the world, which is about 5 billion facial frames. So it's a ton of data, and it's definitely one of our key competitive advantages. But at the same time, it's very private data, right? It's very personal and very private data. So privacy is one of our core values. Like you, Reem, we have to think very carefully about, okay, who has access to that data? Where is it housed? The second is opt-in and consent. Like, it's so important that people have an opportunity to explicitly say, yep, you can capture this data about me, or nope, I don't want you to do that. And we totally respect that. So we will not engage in any industries where you do not have an explicit opportunity to say, I'm okay with you doing this. So security or surveillance is an example where people often don't have a say, right? And so we're like, okay, we're not okay with that. And then the third is how we think about bias in the data set, right? Like if you train this algorithm, in our case, if I train a smile classifier using data that is primarily white and male, and then we try to apply it to, the three of us, it's not going to work because the algorithm has never seen any people who look like that. So thinking about data diversity, the diversity of the data, and how to really make sure we're not accidentally building biases into these algorithms is really key. And goes back to what Reem said, you have to be intentional about it. You have to be super self-aware as an organization. Where are our blind spots and how can we mitigate these risks and be very thoughtful and intentional about it? And not all companies choose to prioritize that.
No, and it's even the way you ask the question, like for us, because we do a lot of surveys, it's the way you ask the questions. It's the way, my favorite insight to ever give a client is one where we completely dismantle their assumptions, right? Like we just actually showed, we are about to show client, but we just did the analysis for a client, and it was fascinating to see, because the assumption is that if you're educated and you have a university degree, you end up creating more jobs. The actual data that we got, and it was actually a substantial number of data from a specific community, the ones that created the most jobs were women who had not finished high school. And that was fascinating to watch. And yet the solutions are being designed for men that have finished university or finished high school, right? And so this is where it becomes very interesting of, just completely providing evidence to say that assumption is not true and rethink about the way you do things.
I'm just going to build on what you said, Reem, like what is your take, and Rana too, feel free to both answer the question. What is your take on being women in a male dominated field generally? Like you just said, all of the solutions are usually done for a white male graduate or bachelor's person. So now it's like you're pioneers, Rana, definitely, and you, Reem, since you're taking a completely different track. So what are the challenges and what are the things that made you more resilient to be able to be in high positions such as CEOs of these leading companies?
So I have to acknowledge first that I come from a family and an environment that was extremely supportive. I never faced discrimination. My parents raised my brother and I as total equals. And I want to acknowledge that this is not the case for everyone else, right? But I've also had amazing mentors. I've had amazing bosses in the past. I have amazing shareholders and boards. So I did not face what your typical woman would face in terms of challenges, not because the challenges do not exist, but because I always walked into those challenges with a sense of equality, and and I never gave I had the confidence, I had the backing, I knew what I am capable of. So I never actually thought I can't do this because I'm a woman, or if someone would treat me as such, my answer would be, are you kidding me? Right? Versus retreating in my shell. And so I fully acknowledge that. And I think it's important to talk about privilege, right? So I come from a place of privilege in that sense. And I got amazing opportunities, education and work, etc. Of course, I've been into meetings where, they would call you sweetheart, or, it's like, oh, that's cute, or, or someone who would think you're the assistant, versus the CEO. These happen, right? But then you open your mouth and they shut theirs, right? So I think that's where it happens. But if I would have an advice, is I can't tell you how important it is to have a network of support. I cannot highlight how important. I don't think I could have I mean, I wake up in some days where I say, why did I do this? Like, why there's a simpler track in life. Maybe they glorify the CEO and the entrepreneurship title very much. The reality of it is much less glamorous. It's a lot of donkey work and hard work, and you're the CFO and the CMO and the CEO and so you have to do a million things. But I don't think I could have done this without a network of support, whether it's friends I can talk to, mentors, colleagues, the Young Global Leaders Network, partners in life and in, talking about everything that's, whether it's about technology or anxiety or, questioning yourself, what's the right thing to do, what to read, etc. And I think, especially for women that don't necessarily have that enabling environment, that support network today is more important than ever, and is available and is accessible and is online, and you can reach out to it. And so if your direct environment might not be extremely enabling, find those little communities of support elsewhere. I think there's no way I would have done it without it. No way. When I started the company, I sent an email with the concept to 40 people. I got responses within 2 days. Amazing feedback. That's what you need.
That's wonderful. And it's always great to have like a great support. Serena, I'd like to hear your end of this.
Yeah, some of the threads are very similar, and I absolutely resonate with a lot of that, Reem. So I also grew up in a family that was very supportive, especially of our education. So I have 2 younger sisters, and I clearly recall when I was maybe 8 or 9, I overheard my uncle tell my dad, "Why are you investing so much in your daughter's education? Like send them to whatever school and just like invest in real estate or etc." And I was so scared. My 8-year-old version of me was so scared that my dad would actually pull us out of school and deprioritize that. And my parents didn't, because they believe in education, and I'm so great. It was the best, investment they made in me and my sisters. And I paid forward with my kids. And I grew up kind of in this environment where I knew I have their backing and support to explore kind of different career paths. But I found out that I guess it was always within the confines of certain gender roles, right? So it came second to, being a mother and a wife, for example. And when these 2 things came into tension with each other, I kind of had to make a choice, right? And it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy for me and my family and, people around me. So I think I kind of have to think a lot about that. But at the same time, as a CEO, like, I don't wake up every day and think, oh my God, like being a woman is in the top 5 or 10 or 20 challenges that I face. It's not. It's the same type of challenges you face regardless of your gender. You have to figure out product market fit. You have to raise money for the company. You have to bring in the best talent. You have to communicate with your stakeholders. It's the same set of challenges regardless of your gender. In my experience, it was a little harder raising money, especially when we spun out of MIT, because we are a deep tech company. We're an emotion company. My co-founder is a woman. So, we were coming out of academia, 2 women scientists raising money for an emotion company. So I think, and often pitching to, not often actually, in our first round of investment, we pitched to maybe 30 investors, and they were all older white men. Like, there was 0 diversity. So that has just made me super passionate about supporting female founders, but also female investors. I think we need a more diverse ecosystem across the board, not just the founders, but we need diverse money too. And then 100% in agreement with what Reem said. I could not have done this without my mentors and my sponsors, who have taken a risk on me and supported my journey, who have also, nudged me when I needed it. Like when I had a lot of self-doubt and kind of imposter syndrome, a lot of my mentors kind of would nudge me. Yes, you can be CEO, or yes, you should absolutely go talk to this person or raise this new round of funding. So I'm very grateful to my support network as well. And I think it's really, I think women don't necessarily prioritize networking.
Sure.
And I think it's really key.
So Rana, to just stay with you, there's a question now. We're going to move to the Q&A. So, what is the bigger vision for emotional AI? Where do you see its future going in this rapidly developing world?
Yeah, so I think this is going to be the default human-machine interface. It's going to power our phones, our cars, our fridges. It's going to our Alexas, our Google Homes, right? It's going to be part and parcel of all of our devices and our technology. So it's going to have a role to play in how we deploy health, how we talked about mental health. We can quantify using facial expressions level of anxiety and stress and depression. So there's amazing opportunities in that space. Social robotics is another one, retail, commerce. So yeah, I really think the opportunities are endless in terms of where this technology can go. And I'm excited to play a role in moving that forward.
Anything specific you're working on now that you can tell our viewers?
Yes, we are very focused on the automotive industry. So we're partnering with the large automakers around the world to bring driver monitoring systems and in-cabin systems to our cars so that the car can flag if a driver is texting while driving. We see a lot of that, or tired or falling asleep at the wheel. We can also track what else is happening inside the vehicle, and we're working with car companies to personalize the mobility experience. So a lot going on in that space, and hopefully you'll start to see some of that technology come to market in the next few years.
Very exciting. Reem, there's a question for you. You described your work primarily with large institutions, but how can SMEs in their limited capacity introduce elements of sustainability and impact in their work?
Yeah, so the person who's asking that question is one of the members of my support network. Hi, Mohammed. So definitely, I would say the biggest mistake people make is thinking that you have to make it big to be sustainable and be impactful. Second mistake is they think that impact is only on external stakeholders. I think the very first stakeholder you can have impact on are your employees, right? So if you have the right values, if you establish the right policies, the right engagement mechanisms, the right benefits, I think that's something that can very easily be part of any organization, regardless at what stage they are. And that also includes gender equality, diversity and inclusion, and recruitment of your team. That also means stakeholder engagement in general, right? So as a company, as a startup, thinking not just what is the value that I'm offering from a business point of view, but it's also thinking about who am I, who do I want to be, what do I stand for, and how does that reflect on every single stakeholder, right? And so this is about, again, intentionality and consciousness. It's not about dollar amounts. You don't need to, startups at the beginning cannot even afford to pay, competitive salaries, but you can do stock options. You can be extremely mindful of how you recruit and about, you're starting from scratch. So there's no reason why you should have a gender pay gap. So it's a lot of these elements that you need to be thinking about that don't require spending money, but they require values and intentionality. And I think that's where it actually starts.
Can I give an example from our experience? When we started Affectiva, Ross Picard, who's an MIT professor, and she's my co-founder, and I really debated whether we should be a nonprofit or a for-profit company, because we were really committed to doing good with this technology. And we decided we wanted to be a sustainable kind of for-profit organization. But from the get-go, we were very committed to still supporting kind of do good use cases of the technology. So autism is one of the amazing applications of this tech, but it's a niche market and it's not necessarily a revenue driving opportunity for us. But we still essentially have carved out a license for the technology to partners who use it in autism or Parkinson's disease or suicide detection. And we do not charge any money. we don't charge for the technology. We also kind of assign a certain number of hours per month where our team can help give support. And again, we could have waited. I mean, we could have said, you know what, let's not do any of this until we're a profitable company and we can afford to do all of that. But we decided not to wait. And again, the verdict's going to be out on whether that was a good decision or not. But I felt like it was an important decision because I know our technology can be helpful in these domains. And if we don't provide it, we're just slowing down innovation and solutions in these spaces.
And Rana, correct me if I'm wrong, but even when you provide this technology for free to those clients, because we did the same to organizations that couldn't afford, but we didn't even debate whether to wait or not. We said, you know what, consider it our investment in learning. Exactly. Because we're working with them. They're not charging us, but we get to use their data. We get to understand how they work. We get to understand the requirements. We get to refine our product. And so there's so many ways of embedding it where we don't look at it as a cost, but as an investment in learning. And definitely it would be, and I'm sure you've learned a lot from having applied this with these types of organizations.
Totally. It's definitely helped make our product better, but also it's an important recruitment tool, right? A lot of people want to join Affectiva because of our core values and our commitment to doing good with this technology. So I people want to provide, a few hours of their, of their time once a month to help these causes. So yeah.
The only thing I would say, because you said we debated for profit, not for profit. Mm-hmm. My favorite saying on that is for profit, not for profit is just purely legal status. It's not, but in all cases you need to be sustainable and you need to generate, revenues, etc. But I think a lot of people think that the mindset of being registered as for-profit makes you even more aware of how, or more conscious of how you need to be managing your resources. But I don't think in all cases you need to compromise either on how you use your resources or your values. And I think that's actually, it's amazing to see that a company does both.
It brings me to our next question. When did either of you realize that you were at the point of mentoring others? As a young professional, I've been in more and more situations where I've realized my experiences are valuable to my peers. I'll let you both answer.
Reem, you want to go first?
Sure. Mine is very short. I did not realize it until someone asked me for support. I don't think I realized that I could. I realized if I have any support to give, that I'm able to give that support, and I always make sure that I do. But then and making sure that you're actually open and available and approachable to people, I think that's the key. But then it's when people try to approach you, and it's, I think a lot of things we take for granted, and we think that we're the only ones going through that journey, that we're the only ones going through that challenge. And then the beauty of communication and of having that support network is to realize that every single person, has gone through a similar challenge or have gone through somewhat similar circumstances, and their experience might have helped. I think being a mentee first makes you much more aware of how important mentoring is, and then you realize that just like you received support, you need to pay it forward and also provide support. I think it's not about a realization moment. I think it's an evolution of how much experience you have and how much you can bring value to others. But I think that you also never stop being a mentee, even to the people that you mentor. So even with the people that I actually mentor, I learn so much from them. I learn, I understand that, what motivates them and what bothers them and what are things that make them very sensitive, are very different from other people. I learn about, diversity. I learn about aspirations. I learn so much from the people that I mentor, not just from my mentors. And so I think it's more of your willingness to continuously learn from other people, and and being available and approachable.
Rana?
Yeah, I don't know if I had a specific moment where I realized, wow, I could be somebody's mentor. I do think it's an evolution, right? And I also think it's a realization, you know, that you have an opportunity to pay it forward, right? Like very early on when I started mentoring, like initially I started mentoring like, you know, other kind of, you know, young, for example, women in academia who are starting to explore different career paths. And then over time, that energy shifted towards founders, right? And not all of them are female. Like some of them are not female, right? And some of them are older or younger, right? Like I think it's like, what kind of experiences have you accumulated over the years that you can share with others? I'm part of the Young Presidents Organization, YPO, which is kind of similar to the Young Global Leaders. And we often talk about experience sharing, not advice giving. And that is interesting too, right? Like when I meet with one of my mentees, it's not necessarily that I have the right answer, but it's more like, in my experience, when I went through something similar, this is how I responded, or this is what I learned. These were my key takeaways. And that makes it more of a two-way relationship. Like Reem was saying, I've learned a ton from my mentees, and I'm kind of invested in their journey now, and I want to be part of their journey and their successes. And honestly, often days when it's really challenging at work or whatever, like connecting with these people and knowing that I'm playing a small role in their journey is often like, it makes my day.
It's wonderful. I think it's like, as much as you got, you give back. And I think that's all about, it's a circle. Rana, there's a question for you from Hamad Al-Dahshan. So your work is fascinating, but allow me to ask about the potential for misuse of this technology. How can your work be used for nefarious purposes? And how can we collectively, as developers, as well as users, avoid such pitfalls?
So hold on a second. Mohammed is the person who's in your support network, Reem, right? Okay, I've just onboarded you into mine. Thank you for the question. Yes, there is potential for misuse for this technology. So even though I'm super optimistic about it, I'm not naive. And I would say the places where it could be misused is, again, if you're being recorded or tracked not knowing, and it could be used to discriminate against certain populations of people or profile certain people. Because it's also very personal data, and it's your emotions, and emotions drive a lot of our decision making. I can see a world where, you know, certain politicians can use this data to manipulate your decision making, for example. So we have to definitely be very thoughtful about who we give access to this technology. Like, you know, the mental health use case, right? I know that, you know, this kind of information could be tracked or collected by a platform like Facebook or maybe Amazon. I don't know if we as consumers trust these brands to be the holders of our mental health data, right? So there's a question around the technology, and there's the people behind the technology and the organizations behind the technology. And we just have to be very thoughtful and build trust with consumers. And be very transparent, right? Like, what data are we collecting? Who has access to it? How is it being used? Yeah, we need a lot more of that transparent approach to technology.
Thank you, Rana. Reem, how do you account for impact measurement in geographical and developmental differences? Are the same measurements applicable, or do you adjust for variations?
Yeah, can I, before I answer that question, there's a question in the Q&A that is eating at me. Can I?
On elitism?
On elitism, because I want, and because I want to touch back on the mentorship, and then I'll answer your question on measurement.
You want me to read it first, or I can know it?
You can read it.
Yeah. What is your views on elitism, on connections that can help you to boost your startup or completely be transparent? How did elitism affect your journey?
Yeah. So I find that fascinating. And back to your first question, I'm going to answer it very shortly so I can give time to this question. The variations are not are more about priorities, right? So it's about what is a priority for that community that you're actually measuring impact on. There isn't, sadly, there are so many. I don't know if it's sadly or not, but there's not one standardized way to measure impact. There's so many different standards, measurement, etc. So it's less about the way we work with our clients. It's less about meeting the UNDP or the World Bank's definition of what it should be. It's about your own theory of change. What is it that you're trying to create? What is happening, and is it happening or not? Benchmarking against others that are doing the same thing, because you could say I spent $100 million to create 10,000 jobs, and someone else would spend $10,000 to create 10,000 jobs, and then it's with the same type of quality of jobs and income level related to it, etc. And so I think benchmarking, prioritizing of what you as an organization is trying to achieve with, it's not just your priorities, but the community's priority, the national priority of where you're operating, etc. So just to get it out of the way. The second piece, which is the question that was asked on elitism, I'm uncomfortable with the word elitism because elitism means something else. I think I'm a little bit, I think what you mean is privilege, right? So it's the fact that, and anyone would be lying to say that the fact that we didn't go to very good schools, that we were exposed to international communities and standards and expertise, it didn't play a role. Of course it played a role. And anyone who would deny that is not being transparent about it. I don't think that if I did not work where I ended up working, I would have gotten to where I am today. And I don't think that if I had studied where I would have studied, I wouldn't end up working to where I was working. And so, of course, there's no question or like an atom of doubt that having the privilege of coming from a certain social and economic background led to where we are today. The question that is and should be interesting is, what are we doing, us and others, to ensure that these opportunities are open to everyone, right? And I think that's the important question to have. It's not, I think that there's a lot of inequality in the world. I think that, one of my favorite sayings was, it used to be the difference between first class or business class and economy class used to be a better meal, and now it's a better life. And I think that's very true, because I think that if you're unable to have access to proper education, to fourth industrial revolution skills, your ability to compete in a very competitive job market is going to be impossible. If you don't speak good English in the Middle East, your ability to get a good job that pays well is going to be much more difficult. Your ability to talk to investors and VC funds and raise money is going to be much, much lower. And so I think that this is where we need to ask two questions. One is, how do we make sure that through our work, we make those opportunities available for everyone? And how do we make sure that public education and good education is available and accessible for everyone, that jobs are accessible and available to everyone without WASTA, etc. WASTA always exists. It exists in the West, and it exists in the East, and it exists in the North and the South. It exists everywhere. But the idea is, how can we ensure that just because you don't come from a specific social and economic background, it does not affect and impact the future that you could have and the opportunities that you could have? And today it affects. It affects, I mean, it makes it impossible even, right? I mean, if it makes it exponentially more difficult to be able to succeed. Having said that, that's our definition of success. I also want to be very conscious of that. If my definition of success is a tech startup, then yes. If my definition of success is peace of mind and sustainability and dignity, it might, I think it might look a little bit different. My retirement plan is to become a farmer. So, so I'm just putting it back out there. Having said that, does privilege play a role in where we are today? 100%, and there's no question about it. Should we do something about this? 100%. And that's the whole point of mentorship. That's the whole point of advocacy. That's the whole point of impact, right? So how do we make sure that every company, every organization, and every not-for-profit foundation and organization, every government entity is actually thinking about diversity and inclusion, is thinking about quality of its services to everyone. It's thinking about gender equality. It's thinking about access to opportunities for everyone.
Thank you, Reem.
Rana, if you wanted to say anything about that.
Rana, do you want to add anything to that?
Just that technology is an incredible, incredible opportunity for financial and economic growth, and the barrier to entry to fields like AI is actually pretty low. So anybody can take, some online classes and become proficient in machine learning and computer vision. And I think that opens up a lot of doors. And I agree with Reem, it's incumbent on us as leaders in our communities to make sure that these opportunities are inclusive. It's so easy for us to just hire MIT grads, but we make it our job to open up these opportunities for people who might not even apply to us because they don't think that they qualify.
Yeah, so 84% of our team are graduates of public schools. 84%, because we make it's intentional for us is to give access to opportunities to everyone. Like Rana said, I think technology can be an amazing tool. We just need to make sure that they have access to access to internet and access to the machine. And so, we need to work on that. But I think it's on us, every single one of us, not just us, to make it our mission to provide opportunities for everyone.
And it's also the fact, like, for example, where you have like alumni of these universities, when you have like, all of these graduates that are actually taking the time to highlight that similar stories and to bring back impact to the region. That's also a way of giving back. Might not be 100%, but that's also their way of giving back. We're on the hour, and do you want to say any closing remarks before we close out, Rana or Reem?
Just very grateful to be here, and excited to connect with everybody who was able to join us. I'm very easy to find on social, and just feel very grateful for this conversation. I feel like we could do a deep dive on how to make these opportunities inclusive and impactful, and so thank you.
Yeah, I want to thank you all, and Rana, it's been an honor and a privilege to share this with you. And Mayce, I want to say a big thank you for moderating this so beautifully and gracefully and intelligently, and and I want to thank Dana for bringing me on board and telling me I still count as STEM. And so thank you.
The honor is ours to host you both, like Rana and Reem. It was honestly a very nice conversation, very insightful, and such remarkable careers. I'd like to thank you both, and it was a pleasure moderating this panel with both of you. I thank you all for joining our Women of Impact episode in the 2021 webinar series. Keep an eye out for announcements soon for our next session with Lu'ay al-Basyouni. From all of us at MIT AAA, stay safe and goodbye.